Hey Joel, welcome to Automate All the Things. It's an honor to have you.
Hey Aaron, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. So we've got a bunch of folks in the chat that are excited for you to teach us how to create an external CMS in Webflow. So essentially, how do we use an external database, whether that's Baserow, Airtable. I'm not going to use the word bypass the CMS, the Webflow CMS. That's not the goal, but that is in essence what we're going to try to do. But before we jump in, Joel, how about a quick intro into you, how you got to this space, and just talk us a little through who is Joel.
So hey everyone, I'm Joel. I'm from the UK. I'm a software developer who's relatively new to the no code space. So I was previously working professionally in Android development. Wanted to move to web, and was WordPress, and then found Webflow and no code, and just trying to fill some of the gaps and add standard development practices over to the Webflow space.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got some UK acolytes, remember the word, or your compatriots, Glenn. Folks from all over the world joining. So it's interesting. I guess you are one of those developers that crossed the chasm, but you're hoping to give us as in the no code world kind of those development standards. So maybe talk a little bit about that. What do you mean when you say standards that you wish were in the no code world?
So the main thing when I started using Webflow and other no code tools was, at the moment there's quite a heavy dependency on webhooks,
Mm,
and webhooks are great, but there isn't so much use of APIs.
right.
Um, and a webhook is an API, but there is a difference, and there's no to when you should use one and when you should use the other. So yeah, and it's incredible to see what the no code space have done and how they've like adopted webhooks to fill gaps where you would typically use a normal API.
So I'm curious, maybe for folks who, if you come to automate all things, I'm Mr. Webhook, webhook scripts and buttons, basically, rule everything around me. Um, so maybe just before we jump in, uh, what is an example of using a webhook in the no code world that you would think like, oh, this is a prime example of we should be using API? And obviously we're going to be foreshadowing the rest of this stream, but talk us through what is the use case for one and what is the use case for the other, and how are no code kind of mixing up the two.
So we'll start with the webhook side of things, and a typical flow in development and in the no code space is, for example, Stripe.
Right.
So when someone subscribes to a plan, then a webhook fires and sends data
Right.
somewhere else, or like updates another service.
Mm,
And that's the key thing, really. A webhook is triggered by the source that's sending the data, so
right.
something that's out of our control.
Hmm.
Um, then on the other hand, an API is triggered by a request. So again, in terms of MiddleLink, we're going to talk about it from the client side. So a user clicking a button on a website can then call an API that gets a response.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's like a kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Um,
The way, in our discussion, what was interesting, and I promise we're going to jump into the use case, but I think it's important to distinguish like how no coders have been using webhooks. A good example is like Airtable to Webflow or Baserow to Webflow. We sync information. So we say when something is updated in Airtable, trigger a webhook through Zapier, through whatever, through a script to Airtable, to Webflow to mimic that change, right? So we're essentially mirroring two CMSs through webhooks instead of being like, well, if my data is here, let me just pull that data via an API at the moment where I need it. In this case, in our case, will be when a user hits a website, right? Or when a user clicks a button. And so we've been kind of just working really, really hard to be like, can we sync all these things through webhooks? And your argument, and I guess how developers would do that is, can we, grab that data when we need it? Am I kind of understanding that distinction correctly?
Yeah, you're 100% right, and it's not that. Just want to like
Yeah,
to
yeah.
reiterate, it's not that it's wrong to do the syncing side.
Hmm.
Um, Again, MiddleLink, one of the main benefits is kind of building web apps.
Right.
So it's not for building blogs.
Hmm.
And the majority of Webflow users are building blogs, so
Right.
they want their content to be indexed by Google. And this approach, it isn't indexed. So that's like a kind of a big factor to take into account.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. So we're thinking of like, I'm a web app. I don't necessarily want each user's profile or what they see in the app to be indexed. I just need to retrieve that information either for that specific user or for that specific page, right? But I'm really trying to pull the information at the convenient moment instead of syncing that information. And it's a great point of like, if you want SEO value, you have to sync all of these CMSs so that the data lives in a way that Google can index. Okay, so I do want to jump in because I think this is all very theoretical to people. So let's get to the meat of it. And so I'm going to start sharing my base here. Start sharing my browser. This is where. So let me know in the chat that everyone can see it. And no one can see it. So let me just. Whoops. We're going to go into some. Hey friends, we're having some technical issues with my browser here. Just give me a 2 seconds here. See, this is where you all get to see behind the scenes. Yeah, we're good. We're good, friends. I got you. There we go. Now everyone could see my screen. And there we go. So this is what happens, Joe, when I don't stream for a week. I lose everything I've learned. So welcome back, everyone, to Automate All the Things, where we learn how to build things, but also break the stream in the process. I appreciate everyone's patience. So Joel, can you see my screen? Seems like everyone in the chat
yep.
can see me. Awesome. Okay. So our goal for today, our one tunnel vision goal is I'm in Baserow here, which looks strangely like Airtable. It's an open source version of Airtable, if you will, or a relational database. We want things that we update here to be reflected in a Webflow page. So when I write, this is new, that change should be, I don't want to say automatically reflected. It's just that when we pull the data live, that's what we want to see. So we want to create this to be our back end of Webflow. Hey Raleigh, welcome to Automate All Things. Good to have you. Joel, talk us through take us through the steps that it's going to take for us to make this our live Webflow backend, if you will, if that's the right technical term.
No, that's the exact term. So we're going to be using this as our database effectively, like our CMS. And there's a few steps involved. So as well as, well, we'll start with the API. So the
Mm-hmm.
reason we can't just fetch this data from the front end is because the request will be made from the user's browser.
Mm-hmm.
And if to do that, we'd need to include our API key in the
Right.
browser, which is a very bad thing to do, and it will result in compromised data.
Yeah.
So what MiddleLink lets you do is add your API key in our service, and it's secured and encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can build out a workflow that will give you an endpoint that you can call from the front end.
Right.
And we're not going to do an authentication example, but you could layer member stack or out setter if you were gating user content.
Mm.
But we're not going to touch on that at the moment.
Yeah. So understanding correctly, you want to create a flow and a Webflow page, right, with some code in it that has, fetches from the front end for folks who aren't maybe, are not aware what
Oh,
that means. It's mainly saying when the page is loaded, go and get the data. That's possible to do with Baserow basic functionality in any API. But in doing so with the native API, it'll have its API key. And I think at the end, I'm happy to show people like how I would do that from the front end, just in the browser, and to show people what the issue is with that, right? So I will do that at the end. But our goal here is to fetch this information, like title, item one, the body, the image, when the page loads from Webflow. So there are two kind of elements here, if I understand correctly. There's the front end, right? The what's on the page, and it's going to mirror this, but we need to tell Webflow, like, here's what the page looks like, here's where you kind of grab that information. and an amount of code that says, okay, when this page is loaded, put this piece of this body, put it here, right? Put it on this text element. This image goes here. So let's start maybe, Joel, what do you think about starting with the front end? And then we'll build
Yeah,
out the
sure.
back end to get the information. How does that feel?
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. We've got Retro, Penny, welcome. Excited to have you all. Joel, you seem to have massive amounts of fans, which is great. So everyone's shouting out in the chat. Okay, so our first step is how do we create space on our page where we're going to input this information that we're going to fetch, right? Fetch. I'm trying to use proper words here. So in Webflow, I have a blank page, right? So walk me through, how do I create a skeleton where I can go and fetch the information?
So there's multiple ways to do this. You could either, if you're comfortable writing JavaScript, then you could use vanilla JavaScript or jQuery.
Right.
Alternatively, you could use something like FinSuite's CMS API to kind of build out a template. And the benefits of that is you can use the native collection elements within Webflow. Now, as someone who's got a background in Vue development, that's what I love, and that's how we build websites for clients. So we've built a framework that lets you use Petite Vue, which is I don't want to get into it too much, but a lightweight distribution of Vue. So you can create templates, and we've got some pre-made ones. So don't worry, we're not going to be writing JavaScript.
Yeah,
live.
It would be okay to write JavaScript. We could write a little bit of JavaScript. This is a good place. Maybe at the end we'll do some JavaScript. You're underestimating our capabilities, but let's start JavaScript free, and then we'll go into JavaScript Lite. So,
cool.
You mentioned that there are some kind of pre-built templates that I can use to kind of just do the front end part, which will be kind of placeholders for where the data that we fetch from the API will go. So how do I go about adding that template into a Webflow page?
So at the moment, the easiest way is to use our Chrome extension. And to be clear, this isn't a MiddleLink extension. This is our sister product, components.io. So I believe you've got the extension.
Oh, sorry, that was the wrong one. Yeah, right here.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And before we paste it, would you mind just adding a div inside of the body with some padding, just so we don't fill the whole page?
So recognize a few new faces. Hey, Maria, welcome to Automate All Things. Excited to have you. Let me know in the chat if you all have any questions so far. I really want to make this go at the speed of which people kind of make sure that they grasp. So I'm adding in a div block. Would that be any, right? As long as we have something to copy paste into, is that right? Yeah.
Yep. And just to add some padding, just so we're not kind of, filling the entire page. Yeah, that'll be brilliant.
Oh man, I know that there are some Webflow people just like cringing right now of the way I've done that. But listen, I'm not this is not the stream for designers. So I've added some padding, and now you're saying I should talk me through what I'm adding here and how to think about it.
Okay, so these are base components. So the idea is you can use these as the starting point, the kind of generic use cases, but then you can build out on them. So if you didn't want to use a grid, you can just change it to flex and display a list of items, or you could use the form block, and that's kind of a pre-built native Webflow form. But when we're going to focus on the collection,
okay, just
so
copy.
Yep. If we just copy it and then paste it within that div block, and here we've got an element built with just native Webflow elements, and there is a big yellow notification. We don't need to touch on that at the moment. There's an optional installation step if you're using multiple components on a page, so you can make them talk to each other and communicate. It's outside of the scope of this, and we don't need to. But there is some useful information if you want to.
Let's we have you here, so I think anything in this one we will have you to help us with. But okay, so now here is more what we're interested in here. So we've got Bram, co-founder of Baserow. Awesome. If any folks have questions about Baserow, that's amazing. And I feel like everyone in the chat is judging me about my design skills, so I will ignore the chat and that stuff. But luckily, Joel designed the CMS. So, am I understanding you correctly? Our goal for today, Joel, is to take, have this image, right? So we have every one of these kind of buckets are going to be one row, right, in Baserow. So item 1, this is new in the image, and so we want this to be dynamically fetched, right? So this image will be this one right here. The description will be this here, and item 1 will be right here. And we're gonna like live fetch it from Baserow. So we're not going through the Webflow CMS. And what we've done here is kind of you've given us like a template that we can change and adapt based on what we want.
Yes, exactly. You've nailed it. And just want to mention that the 2 items on the right-hand side, so the dummy items, they're purely there for visual representation. So when you're designing your page, because we can't fetch the data in the editor at the moment, we've added those so that you can just see what your design is going to look like. And you can add more dummy items. They will never be shown on the page. We just care about the one called template item.
Got it. So this is the structure and you're just repeating it here. Is there anything else that we kind of need to understand here before we jump into like what else did you add? So it seems like there's a loading, error, and then a script. So talk us through the rest of the elements here.
Yes. So the loader is a div, and then in there we've got an embed with an SVG, and we've got that so that when we're loading, as the data is going to be loaded after the page has initially loaded, if you're on a slow internet connection or you're fetching a lot of data, you want to show that to the user so they know something is happening and they're not just sat there with a white page. Similarly, with the error, we've just got a hard-coded error there, so a static message. But what we could do is display errors returned from the API. Again, we probably won't touch on that too much in the stream, but you can do that. So, for example, if you are using member stack authentication, you could check if a user or outsetter, check if a user has access to that record. And if they haven't, you could show no permission and kind of dynamic errors.
Okay, so this is also the gating mechanism if we want to that makes sense. So loading, error, and then we've got this kind of component logic script embed. Should we jump into this now or later once we fetch that information?
I think we'll jump into it after. Just you're a lot better judge of time than me.
Oh, you're good. We got time. We got people are excited. We got time. Make sure I want people to understand it. So here is kind of the code that is required in order to generate this page or pulling the information. It seems like the main thing is this right here, right? That like what URL are we fetching the information from?
Yes. So at the moment that's got a mock URL, which is dummy data. So what we could do maybe next is just publish the page. But before we maybe publish, just to touch on that code as you mentioned. Sure. So the great thing is this is all automatically generated. So we've generated this as an example for when you're using the base component. But maybe if we open the extension again, and then if you click the logic button, again, we won't touch on it too much, but just so people can kind of understand. If you scroll down and close that big modal, this is the visual JavaScript builder, which is our sister product. And this outputs petite view code. So this example here is if you were to click the code button in the navigation at the top.
But that's what we outputted.
Yeah, so you could change it and then copy it again. So you don't have to manually write it.
So that's answering Riley's question. So if we don't want to use like the base, we can come into here, create our different components, right? And then this will output the code we need to pull in. And so I think let's keep this for the end. Let's say we wanted to add an attribute, something like another field from Baserow that we need to pull in. We can use that as a use case at the end, but I do want to kind of show people, okay, how do we so let me publish, right? That you said, let's publish to here, right? And then if I open this, This is actually pretty cool. Like we actually see this is live data, right? So this is pulling from a I think it's source console. Can I see where it's network, right? Can I
Yes.
see where it's pulling from? It's pulling from MiddleLink. Yeah, and this is the
No, that's the page from Webflow. If in the
oh right, right,
filter
right.
at the top, in the filter, yeah, if you type in mock,
Here we go.
um, mock dot
No, here
components.
we go.
Oh yeah, that's it. Sorry, it's really small on my screen.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, yeah. So this is essentially the API that we're pulling from, and this is what we're rendering. So this is not CMS data. This is live from a third-party API, and now our goal is to change that API into this, kind of data or database. So yeah, let's jump into it. So essentially, what we want, if I understand you correctly, is we want to use MiddleLink to give us a URL that will replace this one that will be coming from Baserow, right? So we theoretically could potentially use the Baserow API, but that would expose our API key and make calls from a browser. That's not what we want. So we want to go ahead and replace this right here with something that comes from MiddleLink, but that has to be configured in a way that returns the right information. Is that kind of making sense?
Yep,
Yeah.
you've got it perfect again.
Awesome. So yeah, let us know in the chat if this is going too quickly, too slowly. I'm like really excited to change information in Baserow and have it updated. So I'm here in MiddleLink, and again, our goal here is to generate in a URL that can fetch the information from Baserow. So I'm gonna skip the part like you create a project, you create a workflow. This is the main environment I'm in, right? This is the main page. So we're gonna create a workflow. Is that right? To generate a URL that we're going to copy paste into the page. Cool. So yeah, Joel, this is talk me through this. How do I do that?
Cool. So unlike like typical automation services, we're not going to be waiting for an event.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start from the start node,
Mm-hmm.
and when a request is made, that's the starting point for the workflow.
Right.
So again, let me know if I'm missing anything, but we'll start on the left side. We've got all of the nodes, and the main one we want to start with, them effectively what's used 99% of the time, is the HTTP request node. So we'll drag that onto the canvas, and then perfect, connect it. And then if we click the cog icon here, if you're familiar with Postman or making API requests, this will feel normal. If you're not, then we've tried to make it like a form step by step. If you've got any questions with any specific APIs, always just feel free to reach out to me. But for this example, we're going to jump over to the Baserow documentation.
Yep, right here. Cool.
And we're going to go to the posts table on the left. That's the one. If you click it again, does it expand out into? Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, perfect. So if you scroll to list rows, that's the one. And we're going to want the URL that we're going to be calling for Baserow to get the data.
Yeah. So maybe just a moment here. So what we're essentially doing is list rows, right? So rows in Baserow are, we want to list all rows in a table, right? So we went to our post table, and then we're saying, okay, go to Baserow, take the table number 72437 and list all records in that, but you need to be authorized, right? So we could imagine like calling this in a get with this URL, but then we would be exposing our API key. That's what we want to avoid. And that's what we're doing in Baserow to generate a URL that is unauthenticated that gets that information. So, and if there any questions around Baserow, we've got some folks in the chat who are happy to help. So, so copy pasting, going back to MiddleLink, bam, endpoint URL. Are we going to keep the user field names as a parameter?
We'll leave it there for now.
Okay.
If we've got time, we can move it to another section later on in to just to make it easier to manage. But we'll leave it there for now. And next, we need to select our API key. So I'm not sure if you've already got your. Okay, so we're going to add a new one.
Okay, so we're going to call it Baserow. I'm okay with exposing my API key just for this session. So where do I find my API API
So
key for Baserow?
I'm not sure if because I shared this base with you, didn't I?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you'll be able
Okay, yeah,
to.
let me just hide my browser and then oh no. Just give me a sec here, folks. That, and then I'm gonna hide it from you all. Then I'm gonna go get my API key from Joel. There we
Yeah, 'cause
go.
I don't think I gave you the admin permission, so I
That's okay.
apologize for that.
That's okay. This is what we're streaming here for. Bam, bam, bam. And let me put, so I'm just copy pasting that information into MiddleLink, saving that. Okay. And now everyone is back. That, okay. And I just copy pasted my API key. Hey, grilled cheese dude, excited to have you here. Okay, so we've connected, we've inputted our secret key and our method. We want to do a get call. We're retrieving information, right?
Perfect. Yep.
Cache, disabled default makes sense.
Yeah, we'll leave that for now because we want to showcase live updating the data, and we don't want to be waiting a minute or however
Right,
long we set on the stream.
right.
But we can enable that maybe afterwards.
Cool.
Um,
Headers,
so then, yeah. So for the headers, I reckon if we jump back to the documentation, just so we can show where we're getting this. So yeah. So
you,
within the documentation and whatever tool you're using, it'll be documented whether you're using Airtable or Baserow or even a bespoke system. You'll need to send the API key, and there's different ways you can do that. In
mhm,
this instance, we want to add a header record with the key authorization,
right.
um, and then the value, which will be token followed by your API key.
Yeah. Okay, so header, add a header. Our key is going to be authorization, right?
Yep.
Authorization, and then it says token. So the word token. And then I want to add, how do I pull, I don't want to show my API key here. So how do I get that information from the connection that we did 2 seconds ago?
So if you use two double curly braces, that's how you can access dynamic data. And this is a brand new workflow, so there's not a lot in it we can access, but we can access the connection key, which is effectively the secret key we defined above.
Got it.
And just to touch on, we don't recommend pasting your API key into the field because it's not encrypted. So that's why we add it in the previous step, because then it's secured and encrypted, and then we just make a reference to it.
Cool.
Um,
So we've got a URL, we've got a method, we've got, the database we're pulling from, which is essentially just, our authentication keys, right? So this is not an actual connection to Baserow. This is just saying Baserow maps to these keys. And then we need to put the authorization. And then if there were others, like for folks who may be using the Webflow API, I don't know why you would use it, but you have version 1.0.0, which always trips me up. So those are all the headers, and you could find them, here, usually under H, right? All the various headers you need for a specific API. It seems like in our case, we just need the authentication. So we can go ahead and, is there any query strings, I guess, any options? I'm not very familiar with the Baserow API.
So we again that the in the URL the users parameter, we could move that down to here, but it's not going to be any huge benefit
Mm-hmm.
for the stream to show that. But you could, for example, if you wanted to, again, if you're integrating with say Outsetter,
Mm-hmm.
you could get the record associated to the logged in user's ID.
Got it.
And you don't have to send the user's ID from the
Right.
front end. You send the token, and we do everything server side.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
But
And imagine, like, so just food for thought here for folks who are like, okay, why would I ever use a query string? You could say like, okay, maybe I want to order my, I'm on a blog post, my users or their content based on the number of views, and that's one of the fields in your database. You can order by, right? And you could also filter based on a user's information, right? So that can be a variable that you're passing through here. For now, we're just going to retrieve the whole table, and then we could play around, geek it up a little bit after. So I'm going to go ahead and save this node, right? Okay. Do I want to execute the workflow? Joel?
yes. So
Yes.
when building out the workflow, I always recommend executing it. So then you've got the data. So when you add the next node, you can reference it.
Okay.
Um,
So
and you can
I've
see the output at the bottom.
Okay, yeah. So let me see if I can understand this. It's actually my first using MiddleLink. So this is the output of the API that you've put into table format, and so Baserow gives you some metadata, first. So it's saying we return 20 results for this API call. The next results we're going to return are XYZ. There are none. The previous, that's if you do page pagination, which we didn't. And then there's a result field, right? Or element or object. I guess object is the right word. And here is the array of rows, right? So the first row
Yes.
has this is new, it's order number one, its title is item one, and this is what we want to map, or parts of this anyway, to our Webflow kind of structure, right? That we've created. Now, I imagine that this list is not the way we want to return the results because we would rather have a flat. Is that the word I'm looking for? Like we want to take that and expand it into actual rows so that it's just an array.
Yeah, so it really varies on what service you're connecting to. So for example, with Airtable, you'll know the ID is outside of the fields. So you have
Yes.
an ID, and so in with Airtable, for example, you'd want to flatten the data so you
Mm-hmm.
can get the fields and the ID.
Right.
Baserow have the ID in the results, but again, this isn't the right format we want to return it to the client. And a good use case is, say you've got a field in your database which is notes on your users.
Mm-hmm.
You might not want to return that to
Right.
the front end.
Right.
So you don't want your users to see it, for example.
Right.
Um,
So I guess how do we go about returning this in a format, right? Like ideally one row for each result that your front end, or like the way we've structured things in Webflow, can understand and turn into one item for each row.
yeah, so we can, for this instance, we can use the cell select node. But before we do that, sorry,
But it's okay.
I always recommend adding the logic node just so we can check if the request was successful.
Got it. Got it.
Um, and then we can throw an error. And again, this would get into the dynamic error messages, but we're not going to touch on that for now. So
Okay. Status code. So we're saying if the status code from the last um, request is equal to or is not 200, is that what we want?
we want to say if it is 200. Well,
Oh,
you
okay.
could do
Yeah.
either,
I guess you
or
could do it.
depending
Yeah,
on,
it is 200. So is equal to 200.
perfect. And then just save and execute again.
Okay, so this is the true node, and this is the so for folks who aren't familiar, we said 200 because API responses are error codes are standard. So that's why when you go to a page, it says error 404 because everyone agrees what 404 means. Everyone agrees that 200 means that the API call was successful. In that it returned data from Baserow. It doesn't mean that there is data there. It just means that the way you've called the API is correct. And so we want to work on the success node or the success branch right here saying like, okay, something happened, right? So what is it that we want to do when something is successful? And then we can do unsuccessful after. And folks, please do not ask me what any other than 200 mean. Because I like 418, I'm not sure what that means.
That,
What does it
I
mean,
can
Joel?
see. So 418 is I believe I'm a teapot. Um,
Wait, what?
so it's, yeah, it's I'm a teapot. So it's I don't know the exact specification off the top of my head, but it was a bit of a jokey HTTP request node, request status. Sorry.
Okay. We'll do it because should I understand any of this?
No, you don't, I'm sure maybe Peter can do a tweet on it and tag me, and then I can retweet it as well. But yeah,
Okay.
it's a funny one. There are a few funny ones.
Okay. So
Um,
so what if it's 200? Let's back to what is 200? What do we
yeah.
want to do? That's okay, Peter. That's good. You're in the right place.
So we want to, yeah, use the cell select, and what this will let us do is choose a cell from the previous data set, and then we'll take the contents of that cell and turn it into its own data set that we
Got
can
it.
use moving forward. Um, So you select the column.
Results. So yeah,
Yep.
column will be results. That's what we want to turn each item in the array into its own cell. If that is that understand correct? And row index, I'm not sure how I should understand this.
So this one is we'll probably be renaming this because it's more technical than it should be.
Mm,
But effectively, because we're selecting a cell, we need to know along the x-axis and along the y-axis how to find that item.
right,
For this instance, we just leave it as 0 because there was only one row, so it's
right.
always the first one.
Got it.
I probably butchered that, but if
That's
you've got
okay.
any questions around that, just drop me a direct message.
Yeah, seems that we understand. And so if I go here, okay, now I have what I think I expect, which is if I can I it's an array, right, that you've put into a table format where each item has those an ID, an order, a title, a body, very long body, and then images itself is an array, right? So we've
Yes.
got
Yeah.
an image of the URL, the name, the size, and there's a few of them. There's one image per item, right? And that's just an array. There's the first image. If we had multiple, there would be multiple here. So if we wanted to flatten this, right, we would do another cell select on this, but we don't need that.
Yes. Yeah. So if we just want, so we can't flatten arrays. We
Mhm.
can cell select an array and turn that into its own table.
Right.
But if,
Sorry,
for
I used the
example,
word flatten
yeah,
incorrectly. You're totally right. You're totally right. Got it. Um,
um,
so this is how do we know? I guess this is a good question. How do we know that this is the right structure that you know that when we paste it, this will understand it? Is that out of the scope here, or can we talk about that a little?
no, we can talk about it. So I advise designing the component, so the component we use in Webflow around your data structure. Um, so you basically just change some data attributes on
Mm-hmm.
the elements in Webflow.
Got it.
We'll show you that in a second.
Okay.
But for example, if it wasn't called title, we just change item.title to item.heading.
Got it.
If it returned heading.
Got it.
Um, so that's yeah, we've pretty much got the workflow here. We could add the error node.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you select, yeah, perfect.
How's that?
Perfect. That's better than the errors I do when I'm demonstrating.
There we go. You always
And
gotta.
brownie points for anyone in the comments who specifies what 555 is.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
yeah,
curious now.
so
Let us know in the chat if anyone knows what 555 is. Um, okay, so now we have the structure. I have two things I'm curious about, right? So we're gonna what do we need to do? So how do we actually take this and bring it into Webflow? Because this is different. I think most people, when they're using these types of tools, they expect like an output. But here we're saying we're actually just outputting a URL that we can then use.
yeah. So in we like you said, we just need the URL for this example. If you were building like a form with this, then you would enable listen mode and send a request and then
Mm-hmm.
use the data from the form fields. But for now, all we need to do is publish the workflow, which basically means the URL you set in your project will be allowed to call this URL.
Got it.
And again, we didn't cover setting up a project, but you enter your Webflow URL or your .com or .io URL.
Got it.
And then once you've got it copied,
Yep.
we can dive back into Webflow. Yep, open the embed.
And then just change this.
Yes. Yeah, that's the one. So the one with the URL, even I have accidentally, when I've been doing tutorials, replaced that one. That is the library that's used to load Petite View. So yeah, if anyone receives a lot of errors, you may have replaced that one, and you'll probably get a cause error. But that's out. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
just rambling now.
No,
So
it's
yeah,
okay.
you've
You're
replaced the
good.
URL.
You're good. You're good. Good. So save and close. So we don't need to touch any of the rest, right? So this was generated automatically. Save and close. And we're publishing here. And I think we should. So the change here, if we go back to this page, our first item was, some janky. And then what we hope to happen is item 1 through item 20. And ideally, we want to find somewhere this is new in that text. So how confident are you, Joel?
Is this as long as the URL for this Webflow site is the project, we should be good to go.
Okay. Who knows? Who knows? If not, we'll change it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, cool.
Refreshing. Boom.
Boom.
We
Awesome.
did it.
Brilliant.
All right.
Awesome,
It's been a while since we had some confetti. There you go. It's been a while.
You
Great
read
job.
my mind.
So that was it. So talk to a little bit about what is happening here, and let's actually try this out. Let's change information. Let's see what's going on. So essentially, if I understand correctly, that code, can we see the code running? Do you have a way of like seeing the connection to MiddleLink as we're here in Webflow?
So we could open the debugger for Chrome and add a breakpoint. Yes.
Do we see it in network? Do we see it here? If I refresh, can I see MiddleLink as one of the connections?
Oh yes. Yeah. If you type middle in there, then yeah, we can. There we go.
And so if I click here, oops.
Oh no, that's not the one. That's the one underneath. Yes.
Right.
There we go.
And so I think this is a good example. So what I was hoping we do actually is like go into the browser and copy paste that URL. But what you're saying is you actually check whether the call is coming from our Webflow website, right? So if I was to just copy paste this, if I go here, copy workflow URL and do a get call from the browser, right? You're saying, hey, you're not executing it from Webflow. So I'm not going to return a result. You check what the origin is. But if we're wondering what the structure is, which is essentially the Baserow API with a little bit of finagling, if you will, this is what it looks like. So this is what you return to the front end, which we then interpret with components. Is that correct?
Yes, that's excellently explained.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So what are some now's the time to start asking questions. I have a few questions of my own, right? So let's say I wanted to add a new field, right, to like maybe a second description or author, not author or some name, whatever.
Yeah, authors. Yeah, perfect.
So let's say, authors, whatever, or name, right? And then single line text, create. Let's give me, Aron, Joel.
And just for the sake of the fact it's a live stream, could we have the name in a lowercase just so we don't have to update our workflow to
absolutely
so they're all consistent, if you know what I mean? Like you can have uppercase and then you just add a node to rename them.
Okay, some of them will be empty because. Okay, no, let me just do it. Who else is here? We got Robert. So question from Robert. Why would we want to do this? A good example is just that your data lives elsewhere, right? So let's say you have data that you don't need to be indexed by Google, that lives in a separate CMS, whether that's Airtable, Webflow, and you want to display that information in Webflow natively. So this might be, hey, when a user signs up, I want to show them their projects, or I want to show them their tasks, right? I don't need a web app to be indexed by Google, but that information lives elsewhere, right? I want to create an internal library, for instance, and things like that. And this works with authentication. So let me know if that makes sense.
I've got a really good use case. So the reason I built MiddleLink initially was the first Webflow project that I got was building. It was like a nationwide car buying website for a company in the UK, and they wanted to enter a registration number and then fetch data for that vehicle using the UK vehicle licensing
Mm-hmm.
API. So this is a way you could enter a registration number, make a request without exposing your API key, and then we get back an image of a kind of a, not the exact image of the car, but like the make and model of the car, whether it had an MOT and all of
Right.
this information. So like Aron said, it's more APIs rather than creating a blog. I wouldn't recommend creating a blog because it's not indexed
Exactly.
by
Yeah.
Google.
I'm struggling to find names here. Zai, Kai, I know the founder of Baserow is here. If we can, when I click enter, go to the next row, that would be fantastic. That would be a huge win for me. So Glenn is going to be here a few times. Doesn't matter. Okay, so I've got names for everyone. How do I pull in? So we want, ideally, another element in Webflow where we're going to input the name. How would we go about doing that?
So if we jump into the editor, and what we'll do is let's just on the template item on the left, let's just copy. Let's add a new one then. Let's add a
Sure.
label.
Heading.
Text field. I always get it confused. I always add a label.
Yeah, let's do an H3 or H4. H4. There's some picky people in the chat. If I make a H1 underneath an H2, they won't like it. So H4. H4.
And then we'll want to go over to the settings panel on the right within Webflow.
Yeah.
And you want to add a data attribute. Now, these are referred to in Vue as directives. And within our extension, there is a list of them and you can read more about them. But for this instance, we want to update the text within this text element. So we're going to use v-text as the name.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the value, I think these are called item. It should be item.name.
Okay. So let's, actually, this is really interesting. So we're saying v.text is item.name. Let's actually double check, right? So here we're saying v-text is equal to item.title. So that's how you think about your structure, right? So you look at what is being returned from your API. And if you want the title to go into this collection title, and then I'm curious to see what the image is. So the image is, you're saying vbind.source. So get the source. And okay, this is interesting. Item.images $.0. So get the first item in that array, and then get the URL, which is one of the objects that Baserow and Airtable returns, because that's how Webflow will display the URL because it's a source, or not Webflow, but I guess just HTML. Is that explaining it correctly?
Yeah, that's, and the vbind is a special one because you're effectively overriding the attribute. So I'm sure everyone in the comment knows that you can't show an external image in a Webflow image element. So you can override the source. You could override the href if you wanted to do a dynamic link. So we could then create a single template page for each of these, that when you click it, another request is made and we've got like a collection page and a single page. Again, But
so this is how, so if folks are wondering, how do we go from the front end to our API structure? This is it. So you have a type, I guess I'll call it like that, like a type, like, is it text? Are we doing something with that? And then you're specifying, this is what you need to search for in the API. So if there are more specific questions, like more deep, or how do I do this, Joel, I'll let you kind of go to that and drop it in the chat. We'll keep 5 minutes for questions at the end. So in our case, in here, we're saying just take the text from item.name. And I think if we go to MiddleLink, now that this is, I don't think there's that much to change in the...
There's nothing to change in MiddleLink.
Yeah, so could we just rerun it just so folks can see that it's now an output, right? So if I go here, right, which is what we want, I should have name.
Yep.
Right. And now if I go to, I republish, do I even, yeah, I need to republish because we've changed some stuff. There you go. Now we have Joe, Colleen a bunch of times, Kai, Glenn, and now we're pulling that extra element from Baserow. So before we do one more confetti, I do want to, we might have faked all of this. So I do want to update information. and show people that this is a real live. So we changed this, right? And so if I refresh here, right, we can see that that is now live data, and we get another confetti. So I do want to take some time for questions. So Retro asks a great question. Does MiddleLink allow us not to have a CMS plan? I'll let you answer. I have a version of this answer. I'll let you answer, Joel, and then I'll give my version of this answer.
So it really depends if you're looking to. I don't see. Hang on, how can I name this? I don't see MiddleLink as displaying CMS data. I see it more as a database. So if you're looking for like a content management system, then and you want it to be indexed as we've mentioned, then you should really use Webflow for the CMS. If you're building an app and you have no need to use the CMS, like I said, if you're fetching vehicle data or just data from Airtable or Baserow, then you won't need to. But in the ideal world, you'll have both, because you'll have a blog on your website, and then you'll also have some dynamic data, whether it be populating a select dropdown or anything.
Yeah. Okay, that was my answer too. So Glenn asks a really good question, which is, can we make it such that you don't need to refresh the page? And I think the answer is no, but I'll let you answer this.
Yeah, so at the moment, our priority is REST APIs. We do have another protocol which is in development, and then there is a third protocol which would solve that issue. But that's not close that's not in like high on my priority list. I believe you can use Xano if you want to use webhooks. But yeah, there is another protocol we will be using, but to answer your question, no, not at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so question from Riley. And again, we've got a few more minutes here, so happy to dive in or kind of do some cool stuff. So could you allow this for users to save a user-defined list or collection? So I imagine this would be, I'm going into my profile, then I have, the blog posts that I liked that get displayed, or, how do I do that? Is it possible?
Yes. So you can send data to anywhere. You can push it into the Webflow CMS. So we do have a clonable. It's using the full view distribution just as a disclaimer, but it lets users submit blog posts to the Webflow CMS using MiddleLink and a native Webflow form, or you could use it to send data to ConvertKit. You can integrate it with the user. So yes, to answer your question, you can do that.
Yeah. So I'm personally really excited because I'm moving my whole newsletter over to Webflow with a ConvertKit backend, and one of the elements I want is the live number of subscribers. So it'd be really cool that, like, if you subscribe and refresh the page, that number goes up, right? And that you use MiddleLink for that, just to fetch from ConvertKit that number of subscribers from Webflow. So that's an example, right? And then I could imagine a world in which people save their favorite articles, then could log in and then see their favorite articles and link out to the actual blog post, which lives in the Webflow CMS. So let us know in the chat if there are any more questions, and I'm sure that there will be some. So Glenn asks, that does not get indexed on Google. So just want to maybe explain why this page, for instance, if we were to publish it, would not show up on Google. So maybe just explain that really quick.
So Webflow, when they display their collection items, they're included in the page server side. So their servers return all of the content. Whereas with this approach, we don't have the data when the page is initially loaded. We're then making the request afterwards. And when Google indexes your site, it doesn't wait to see what requests are made. There are some things they're experimenting, but at the moment, Google don't wait for the data to be returned because it's loaded after the page has loaded.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like if Google, so how I understood this, and this took me a while to wrap my brain around, is if Google comes into this page, it's like entering a room. where like the furniture comes in later, right? So they're like on demand furniture, if you will. But when Google comes in, it's like, oh, this is empty. Peace out, right? Because the items on the page come after the visit, right? And so Google doesn't see it. And again, that's an argument to say like if you need that, if that's a requirement, go ahead and use the Webflow CMS. In this case, that's not the goal. The goal is really to surface items either that are gated, that are specific to the person visiting, or that don't require that SEO indexing. Cool. Joel, I think we've covered the basics. So would love to hear any parting words, or where can people learn more if they're like, oh, I want to do this. Is this the right use case? Where can folks learn more about you and MiddleLink?
So documentation is like the main thing I'm working on at the moment. Now we've got the extension out. If you are looking to use create the extension, the components, I recommend downloading the extension because there's some tips in there.
Hmm?
If you want to message me, you can get me on Twitter, which is 0xjjw, or email support@components.io for components related inquiries. If you're a MiddleLink user, just use the live chat. That's the quickest way. When I say live, I'm not sat there all day, but it's on my phone, so I do my best. And the documentation for MiddleLink is middlelink.com/docs. And it's built using MiddleLink and Webflow. So it's a
Amazing.
good little dog fooding example.
So Joel, huge thanks to you. I think we're gonna have to do a follow-up session because Retro asks how would one gate this content, right? And then maybe we do a follow-up on actually how do we surface user-related content. So that will be for the future. So Joel, huge thanks for you coming on. It was an honor to have you. We've built some cool stuff in an hour. Everyone who joined, I would love to see you next week, where we're gonna have CJ come talk to us from Stripe, come talk to us about how to never take a credit card over the phone again. We're going to do some Twilio automations with some Stripe payment links. So, Joel, huge thanks. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And I will see you soon. Bye, Joel.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much, Aron. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye, everyone.